morning. Morning all. Welcome to the last day of Change Now. What a fantastic first couple of days we've had. I do recognise a few faces that might have been here last night in a rock, paper, scissors war and a dance-off, which was fantastic. And what a great backdrop we've got here for today. We are talking about redesigning the fashion industry. And the time to redesign the fashion industry was long ago. Fast fashion, fueled by overconsumption, leading to mountains of waste. It's a low cost to our wallets, but a devastating cost to people and planet. We might say it's unseen, but if you're saying it's unseen, it's because you're not looking properly. And it's time for a revolution. And we've got the leaders of this revolution, some of them here with us today, to talk about how we're going to redesign the industry. So first of all, I'd like to welcome on stage Maeve Galvin, the Global Policy and Campaigns Director at Fashion Revolution. Welcome, Maeve.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you for joining us. So, I'll let you do your water first.
Yeah.
While we fill some time. We're going to go a little bit personal first of all. We'll do this with everyone. But just tell us, what's your personal journey into Fashion Revolution, into this world, and bring into that as well, what's the biggest challenge you are trying to tackle and that Fashion Revolution are trying to tackle?
Yeah, where to begin? My journey into this world is probably starts with my mum. My mum in Ireland owned a charity shop when I was growing up. So this was a great entry point into the love of the treasure of finding great clothes that someone else didn't want anymore. But the downside of that is, of course, I really saw firsthand when people donate low-cost clothes that no one wants to buy them secondhand. And this leads to a huge waste and dumping problem. And my mum would get clothes into the shop that would never be able to be resold, and then they'd have to be ragged or worse. And folks who thought they were doing something altruistic by donating to a charity shop were actually kind of dumping. So that was where I kind of began to question the functioning of the fashion industry and started to become a bit skeptical about the current system and how it works. And then years later, I went to work. My first job in this industry was in Cambodia with the International Labour Organization. They have a big program there called Better Factories Cambodia, and they work with government, factories, workers and trade unions, and big fashion brands producing in Cambodia. And the first issue that I really worked on was the issue of fainting in factories. So there was a real issue, and there still is, of groups of, and of course it's primarily young women workers, fainting while at work. And you know, there was different theories about this back in 2010, but really it's not mysterious. It's when workers are low paid and they scrimp on food and nutrition, and then they're working longer hours because their base wages are so low. So the excessive hours, the low nutrition, the poor health, it all does contribute to just this really precarious situation where it's very hard for them to function. And you do have fainting in high numbers, and that isn't unique to Cambodia. That's in a lot of parts of the industry. So that really was formative in terms of awakening me to the real social impacts of this industry and the kind of the human components of our addiction to fast fashion. And then to the latter point of your question, I joined Fashion Revolution early this year, but I've been in and around the industry for the guts of 12 years. It's really hard to pinpoint one challenge that we're working on because we're working on an ecosystem of trying to transform the fashion industry. And at Fashion Revolution, our vision is, of course, of a global fashion industry that protects people and the planet and really values human life and the environment over growth. So to get there, we're making a lot of changes. But one I think that I'd like to pinpoint today for this particular audience is that of overproduction and overconsumption. So when you look at the impact of the fashion industry, when you look at the fact that we have ancient forests that no longer exist because of the viscose and leather industries, when you look at the fact that we have rivers and waterways that have dried up because of cotton production. We have microplastics in all of our oceans and waterways. You know, the environmental impact is really significant, and we're not on track to meet the Paris commitments in terms of the fashion industry. But you do see a dichotomy between big commitments made by the industry and practices. And one of the things that we highlight is just the sheer volume that is produced every year. And the reality is, if we're going to tackle not only the climate crisis, but also the inequality crisis, we have to rapidly change how we produce and consume clothing. We can't do it at this rate anymore. We produce every year an annual Fashion Transparency Index, which is really comprehensive and really looks at all of the areas where big fashion brands are disclosing information. And our data from 2021 finds that just 14% of major fashion brands are disclosing their volumes.
14%?
14. Out of 250 of the biggest power brokers in the industry. So this is slow. So we don't have a proper number of how much is being produced every year. And without that number, our conclusion can only be that the reticence there is, if you disclose that number, the case for slowing down is unambiguous, right? Yeah. And then, you know, but then that also leads you to really question, well, how does the industry make its money? It makes its money from mass selling. And if you're pushing to produce less, you're asking them to upend that system and to change that system. And maybe the final point to make, which is connected to this, is because over the past few days, you know, I've been buzzed like everybody else hearing about circular solutions, and, you know, the geek in me gets really excited. But we also really, really need these solutions to be mainstream, and they're not. Our data, again, finds that just 27% of major brands are developing solutions towards circularity, or really looking at circularity, at least communicating it. So, my urge to folks here who are investing in circular solutions, or folks who are creating circular solutions, is, you know, find a way to make it the norm rather than the exception. I don't believe that circularity will be a silver bullet for this industry, but if we can make it truly transformative, if we somehow open it up, and if we somehow don't have a brand by brand approach. So I'd really encourage folks to look at their models in terms of, can they make it open source? Can they somehow expand it to the wider industry? Because as campaigners, we have a long history of pushing for changes brand by brand, and quite frankly, on bad days, it's like whack-a-mole. You know, we have 7 years. And there isn't really time to be slow about this. So yeah. Sorry, I hope that wasn't too bleak for a Saturday morning, but maybe I'll pause there.
No, it's so important, because in the climate space, we break everything down into systems, and we focus on where's the biggest emissions, and we look through the heavy industries, the transport, the energy piece. And actually, a lot of it, the consumer goods, fast-moving, retail, sits across it, and it's not focused on enough, so it falls through the gaps. Going to your then specific role, let's get a bit deeper into the role of governments here. They can enable a transition to a better fashion industry. What's happening in the policy space, and how is this going to lead ultimately to these companies, the ones beyond the 14%, being held to account?
There's a lot happening, actually, and it is exciting because, you know, a few years ago, genuine corporate accountability via legislation for this space and others was just a pipe dream, and it was really, really tough. We were still in the space where policymakers were saying companies can regulate themselves, and voluntary measures were kind of the norm. We've moved away from that, and that's great. So, you know, here in the EU, there's two tracks of activity happening. So you have national level developments. So already you have some leaders in terms of introducing national legislation. You have, and they're generally typically around due diligence and corporate accountability. So there's a law in France, there's one in the Netherlands, there's one in Germany. There's proposals on the table in a few other geographies, like Finland, Belgium, Austria. And then you're seeing campaigning nationally for other EU countries to follow suit. So hopefully there'll be another wave. And typically these tend to be big, broad legal instruments, but they are groundbreaking in themselves in terms of asking for big companies to be held accountable not only for what happens in their own backyard, but what happens in their broader supply chain. And that tends to be very global. And what we've seen at EU level is a few different developments. For fashion specifically, we have the EU textile strategy, which is kind of a bringing together of different frameworks and really focuses on kind of end-of-life products. From our standpoint, as an organization that looks at both social and environmental, we find it a little bit disappointing because it doesn't acknowledge the role of the people who make our clothes. It sort of ignores the social sphere, and we feel those things have to be together. There's also a major proposal on the table called the CSDD, which is the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive. The EU is not good with names.
Love an acronym.
And this is a major due diligence proposal for large companies doing business with the EU, essentially. The scope is really broad, and our challenge with it is that we find it difficult to apply it to an industry as specific as fashion. It's written for every industry, especially when you're thinking about things like the relationships in the supply chain. So it calls on companies to be liable only when their direct suppliers are in scope. And of course, for fashion, you have all this informality, you don't have contracts a lot of the time, you have subcontracting, and the chain is so splintered, so it doesn't necessarily cover that. And you're thinking about it from a justice standpoint, and you're thinking, well, the vulnerable areas of the supply chain, the home workers, the semi-formal workers, the migrant workers, would they be protected under this proposal? And right now, we think probably not, but we have time to push and to campaign for it to be better, and it's still a good start. And maybe the last thing I'll mention is the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive. Again, not great names, which is another EU piece of legislation that's being worked on now, which would compel companies to be transparent about their social and environmental practices. The detail is still being worked out, but for us, we think this could be really compelling. The reason being, we've been in the space campaigning for transparency for 9 years. And there's obviously big companies out there that will be responsive to campaigning, but there's also a lot of them that just are impervious. And the thing about legislation is, of course, it'll lift the standards and everyone will be compelled. So you'll no longer have the kind of the pushing brand by brand. You'll actually have a basic industry standard. And and for transparency, that's absolutely foundational to everything else. And then maybe if there's time, just to mention briefly, outside of the EU, there's other exciting developments. Policy is a bit of a competitive space right now, which has never happened before in corporate accountability. So, we need to run with this and make it better, but it is exciting. Japan are working really quickly on a corporate accountability law. And for them, a big thing they're saying is, well, we want Japanese companies to be competitive. We don't, we want, if other corporations are going to be held accountable, we want our Japanese companies to be able to compete in different geographies. And then you're also seeing in the US, which is really exciting, there's a proposal gone to Congress, which is the Fabric Act. And this came out of a California-based law and is now proposed at a federal level in the US. And what it would do is a few things. It would call for transparency. It would compel investment in the national garment sector in the US. And it would also end the piece rate system, which is a system whereby workers are paid by the piece. And instead of that, they would be paid, they'd be given an hourly wage, which is commensurate with cost of living rather than kind of the rush for production and the rush for production targets, which has been known to be exploitative in the industry. So there's a lot of things happening in the space, and we have to work as campaigners to make sure these developments have teeth. But it is groundbreaking, the point that we're at, and it's taken a long time to get there, and we just need to make sure policymakers make sure that we can actually get access to justice, and these aren't just on paper instruments, basically.
Yeah. Expanded a bit, you talked about the systems approach, holistic approach to accelerating the impacts and how everything's connected here. So how do we ensure the kind of communities, biodiversity, everyone's reaping the benefits? And how does this move from fast fashion come with the opportunities? I mean, you talked about competition. We know retention of staff, these key issues, but what's really going on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's been really, I mean, it's really interesting, the social and environmental intersection and the impacts connecting both, right? So obviously, many of the production countries where our clothes are made are some of the places that are most vulnerable to climate change. And many of the social impacts intersect with the environmental impacts. So for example, with wages, you have workers in Bangladesh, for example, still working poverty wages, still working something like a third of a minimum wage. And therefore, you know, their living costs are incredibly low, and they choose to live in the cheapest areas, which are, of course, the same areas that are the most susceptible to climate change issues. And therefore, they're more vulnerable then to climate change. So there's an ecosystem of, if you pay workers better, for example, they can be better protected and mitigated against the climate impacts. And then, you know, for us as well, at Fashion Revolution, we're really keen to go deeper into climate impacts of the industry. And there's, you know, a major area that there isn't a lot of transparency on, and that's the use of fossil fuels at manufacturing level. So, for example, many of the garment-producing regions are still coal-reliant, for example. So the manufacturing process itself, which might look different to what you see in terms of, you know, take-back schemes and circularity and kind of high-level CEO commitments, when actually Scope 3 emissions, a lot of it is in the production process itself. And we really need to support the transition to renewables, and we need to have visibility on that, and we need, as campaigners, to communicate the impact of that, so that, you know, consumers, citizens, and campaigners are actually pushing for those changes. And there's pressure points on brands and on governments to actually make the changes where the industry is having the biggest impact on our planet.
So you started moving into the people then, the citizens. So we're not going to leave this all up to business and government then. What's the power of the people here?
Yeah, there's a lot of power, actually. I mean, definitely, we would always push, you know, consumer power in terms of being curious, going into stores, asking questions, asking, you know, our mantra is always, who made my clothes? We do know anecdotally that when companies are flooded with requests, they do have to respond, and it does push them to kind of to question and to communicate, and transparency then begins, which can then lead to accountability. But we're also really excited at the prospect of civic power. We have a campaign launching this summer called Good Clothes, Fair Pay, and it's a European citizens initiative. And for anyone that doesn't know, a European citizens initiative, it's not very well known, actually, but we're excited about it. It's a tool whereby if you get 1 million EU citizens behind a proposal, the European Commission is then compelled to take action, or at least consider taking action. So we've put forward a legislative proposal on how the EU could legislate on living wages in the fashion sector supply chain for any company doing business with the EU. And the EU is the largest importer of textiles and garments in the world. So the EU has massive consumption power. And we're tabling to the Commission to legislate on this, and we need the noise of citizens behind us, essentially. And if you are an EU citizen, we'll be launching in the summer. You can go on and you can sign online, actually. And the website is goodclothesfairpay.eu, and we have an Instagram that's already very active. It's also called Good Clothes Fair Pay. And then if you're not an EU citizen, we still need you, because we need 1 million signatures, and we need a lot of visibility, and we need a lot of noise. We need, for example, in Germany alone, we need 60,000 signatures. That's hard. And we have to make people care enough about that. But also, you know, folks have seen these things before. Folks have seen petitions and things like that. But the difference here is that we're using this particular mechanism to get the attention of policymakers in a real way and say, we have numbers of your citizens behind this. They care, and you need to care too. And hopefully then we get living wages on the agenda, because they're not there right now. And we know they're the issue that are most important to workers. They unlock several other things, like I mentioned, climate readiness.
Well, that's it. The policymakers are motivated by those that vote for them.
Hopefully.
So this is goodclothesfairpay.eu. So anyone here today, watching online, watching in the future, well, if you're in Germany, go and mobilise 10,000 people each, 20,000 people each. Let's get some movement behind this. So you talked about the time that we've got left, the few years. What's the vision for 2030 for you for Fashion Revolution? Where do we need to be?
I mean, I suppose 2030, it would be ideal if we didn't exist, right? No.
We all need to be out of a job 2030. That's the
Well,
thing.
yeah, exactly, right? We need to, if we have a functioning fashion industry that has genuinely slowed down in a way that's restorative for the environment, truly, because we're talking about t-shirts here. This shouldn't be as impactful on our planet as it is. The only way is to really reduce, slow down, and just dramatically change our habits. And also just when I think about myself years ago back in the charity shop, the joy of clothes. Clothes should be a piece of joy. And if you have a longer term relationship with your clothes, and if you're repairing, and if you're passing on, it should be like a book, right? We treasure books for years, and yet we're so throwaway about clothes. We spend the same price on clothes as we would on a sandwich, and it's changing that entire relationship. But we do need the industry to dramatically change, and informed consumers, informed citizens are going to be the way that happens, because the industry is not going to get there on its own without pressure points. And hopefully, and I suppose maybe the other thing to mention is just that greenwashing is sophisticated. It's gotten better. And there are some legislative proposals on the table about that, but 40%, I think, of the UK's information towards consumers on environmental products has been found to be lies. So it's also, we need to fight that. There's a big fight there with, misinformation, actually. And if we have good legislation and if we have smart consumers, we can get beyond that.
Yeah. Fantastic. I don't have a longer-term relationship with your clothes. Let's go and build a relationship. Maeve, thank you so much. It's a perfect transition into the next piece on making circularity the norm, the mainstream. But thank you.
Thank you.
You're brilliant today.
Excellent. Okay,
To lick your way. So next up, we've got the panel on the specific solutions to transform the industry. How are we going to mainstream this circularity? So I'd like to invite up Liz Ricketts from the Fondation to talk about catalysing a justice-led circular economy. Hi, Liz. Hi. Please take your seat. We've got Felix Winckler. Here you are, Felix, the co-founder of Reflaunt, allowing brands to offer their customers the ability to resell their purchases. And Celine, please join us. Celine Dassonville, the co-founder and board member of the Fédération de la mode Circulaire, shaping the narrative of circularity and transparency. So we asked Maeve to get a little bit personal as well. So we're going to do that to each of you. Just tell us about your personal journey here and what's that biggest challenge you are looking to tackle within your organisation. And I'll work this way for ease. Felix.
Does this work? Yes. So I didn't start my career in fashion, but in a rather boring area, law. So I started out my career as a lawyer. It was so much fun that I quit it after 3 years. And then I've been involved in early stage startups for the last 15 years. And to make a long story short, a friend of mine from high school called me up about 4 years ago and told me about a very exciting project she was working on. She has been in the second-hand trade for quite a while. She built one of the leading second-hand marketplace in Singapore. And she told me that it was quite surprising that brands were not offering that type of service to their customers, and that it could be quite a smart idea to offer resale of past purchases through the brands or the retailer themselves. And I found the idea quite clever, and I've been involved with this for the last 4 years.
Brilliant. Well, going back to what Maeve was saying about our dumping things into charity shops. Liz, how about you?
Yes, thanks, Dean. So I did start in the fashion industry. I once did very fancy things, dressed celebrities, upcycled clothes, worked on movie sets, and essentially saw the fast fashion industry consume everything that I loved about the industry that I worked in, it creating a lot of waste, causing mental health issues both for consumers and for people who work in the industry. I essentially had a crisis. I have these skills, what do I do with them? I don't want to participate in this industry anymore. And so I started volunteering with anyone who would have me, who was claiming to improve the fashion industry. And that took me to Ghana. And on my first trip to Ghana, I went to Kantamanto Market. Kantamanto is the largest second-hand clothing market in the world. And that's where I first saw the reality of fast fashion. That's where I first understood what a commodity is. Piles and piles of clothes, people walking on top of clothing, clothing flying in front of your face, walking by your head. And it changed everything for me because I realized that what the fast fashion industry did is that it turned clothing into weight. It's just weight being shuffled around the world. That's it. And it's basically led to an industry where every new garment that's created is waste until proven otherwise, which is really unfair for anyone who is trying to do the right thing. And it made me very angry. So I started a nonprofit with my partner Branson in 2011, and since then we've been working between Ghana and the United States. And we work very closely with the Kantamanto market ecosystem. Again, Kantamanto is the largest secondhand clothing market in the world. You need to know two things. One is that it's the largest reuse and upcycling economy. It recirculates 25 million garments every month. The skill set is incredible and unparalleled. And second is that it can't make use of everything. What we found is that 40% of every bale leaves the market as waste, and Ghana doesn't have a way to hide it. There's no landfills, there's no incinerators. Ghana doesn't have the audacity to export the problem to other people. So it enters the ocean, it's on the ocean floor, it's burnt out in the open, it causes asthma, it leads to people's deaths. And what we are trying to do is to support the good work that's happening and catalyze a justice-led circular economy in Ghana. And that's the challenge we've set for ourselves, but I think the biggest challenge to getting there is a legacy of colonialism. It's because of colonialism that people don't ask where their clothing ends up. We assume that there's someone somewhere else in the world that needs the thing we no longer want, and that's not true. No one wants the thing that you don't want. People are not naked. It's why people think that the secondhand clothing trade creates jobs in the global south, which is ridiculous. It's not charity. They pay for the bales. People in Ghana subsidize jobs in the global north, not the other way around. And it's why the global north assumes that it has the solutions and never ever considers that it's the people who are actually dealing with the problem who know best how to solve it. And for me, that's the challenge I'm facing, and I'm a part of that problem. I'm here representing people that are not afforded the opportunity to represent themselves and who don't understand the system that they're a part of because they haven't been privileged like I am to get a visa, to go to Ghana, to see reality. They don't have that opportunity. So for me, it's a big task. Thank you.
Celine?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to be there to tackle a big subject. So myself, I'm not that important. I'm the voice of the 150 person that have joined us, maybe to make circularity the new norms. Building on the first pitches, one thing that is very important is that when we talk about circularity is that we don't know exactly what it is about, on how this business model, because it's not just about vintage clothes, it's not about just conceiving clothes out of waste, it's not just about having long-lasting clothes, it's about understanding the full potential and working in cycle to close the loop, to create open loop and to foster collaborations. So Fédération of Mode Circulaire, that I will call FMC for the purpose of keeping it short, is trying to foster this move toward a fashion that takes its responsibility and leverage collaborations between big actors, small actors, technical solutions, small hands that used to repair old clothes that might need to be connected to big brands that are realizing that it could be interesting to extend the life of their product. So mainly we're just there to foster corporations and to make circularity the new norms. And one thing maybe that drove us together is that when we talk about circularity, it's make sense to people that have been studying what circularity is about. But for the consumer nowadays, do you go to shop saying, I want a circular clothes? It doesn't make any sense. So the definitions of what is circularity, which is not just buying second-hand clothes, because if you buy second-hand clothes, but you buy more and you're not substituting to virgin clothes, it doesn't work. And there are many questions that are coming from the point that we talked about, which is the regulations. Nowadays, we don't know how circularity is going to be valued in the European law and in the product environmental footprints. So we need to work with everyone, small brands, big brands, people who pollute a lot and that haven't changed, people that have got a good footprint, to accelerate that and foster new collaborations so that circularity can be a real opportunity for everyone within the supply chain, because it requests everyone to be involved.
Yeah. Felix, then how have you seen with what you're doing the appetite for circular business models grow in recent years, and particularly in that re-commerce space?
Yeah, I think things have changed dramatically in the last 2 to 3 years. I think a lot of brands were looking at secondhand as something cheap or not particularly attractive. I think the general public is looking at vintage as something cool now. And there are more and more brands who are looking into implementing these types of solutions. So, you know, today we work with the likes of Balenciaga, or also multi-brand retailers like Harvey Nichols in the UK, Net-a-Porter, Mr. Porter, The Outnet, and others. And I think they realize that they can, by implementing these solutions, provide a service of value to their customers. And the market as a whole, if you look at data, you see that transactions on the second-hand market have exploded. You've seen, you know, new actors like Vinted, Depop, and others who are becoming extremely successful. So it's a market of its own, which is growing and growing, and I think it will continue to go in that direction.
So to continue to grow, we need further innovation, and that's a key piece of the work that you're doing, Celine. So how do we drive that innovation in the sector?
That's the big questions, how to drive innovations and how to create new business models. Because when we talk about circularity, if we take it as a full business, just not looking at the vintage or the second-hand clothes, it's very difficult to develop a business model fully circular and fully profitable. So there are many questions that need to be tackled to foster innovations. First thing, there is a lot of waste, and this waste keep growing, or natural resources get limited, or the way we make them grow are quite damaging to the environment. So how will we tackle this waste to turn it into something that is a good product, to craft new products, and that make long-lasting product? That's a challenge that requests investments, because you need to know how to collect the waste, you need to know how to just allocate it, and you need to redesign the way you make clothes, because if you still make the clothes the way we do it now, then it's not going to be easy to make new stuff out of it. Talking about buying back the product that the brand were selling. So they need to know how they've been selling all the time, but they're going to have to be purchaser of their own goods. How much do they buy their own goods? How do they value if their goods are in good state or not in good state? how they repair this stuff, because they were not used to repairing, how they authentify it, and how they put it back to the market without just having a business model which is incentive of buying new one, how they can be more inclusive for the consumer, because there is an opportunity as well for circular fashions to maybe be inclusive in the sense that you give access to product that some population didn't have access to, or you get maybe better taxations. So there is the question of the value-added tax for second-hand clothes. So far, when you buy a second-hand clothes, you pay the value added the same as if it was a virgin product. So why do we have to pay twice this tax? Couldn't it be lowered? And how we can make sure that we seduce investors and we encourage governments to put money in making the circular economy a real one. And at the beginning, you can have cost opportunity of embracing circularity, but if you really want to change the models, then we need to change the whole industrial system, and we need to care about how this change will affect people, and that requires the help of the government, of the European Unions, of private investors, that they don't come to us and they say, what about growth? Well, we need, first things, we need to use less, and we need to refuse to go toward consumptions. So it's more about, what about new business models? How we create them? How we just make maybe a business model where we don't sell anymore? Maybe that could be the new way. You just buy you just lease something to a brand that is responsible to making it last forever. And the other things that we need to lobby about, and the reason why we need to team up, the people that bring innovations, solutions, that are crafting the clothes, that are producing the clothes, that are collecting the waste, it's that it's a complete shift, and it's not one person that can make it happen. So it's all of us sitting here and all of you that can help us to make this happen.
Yeah, because you very humbly said earlier you are not that important, but I'm glad that you came back there and said you are, because everyone here, yourself, there is a power. And Liz, you gave us the insight at the start of the understanding of what's going on in Ghana. Now, for those that may not have the privilege, etc., to be able to go there, but what can people really do in the global north to make a difference, citizens in other countries?
Yeah, thanks, Dean. I think we need policy. So I would say there's two things. One is that the fast fashion industry would have you believe that we have a waste crisis because we don't have recycling technology. But that's not why we have a waste crisis. We have a waste crisis because people aren't paid a living wage. It's only by not paying a living wage that disposability culture is profitable. Otherwise, it would never work. So we need to pass living wage legislation and fight for that. Join Fashion Revolution in that battle, please. Second is, if you're here in France, if you live here, please address your EPR policy. Extended producer responsibility is a tax that's collected for waste management, but here in France, it is 100% a waste colonialism policy. A tax is collected, it's a penny to 6 pennies per garment, but the majority of the clothing is exported to places like Ghana, and none of the money comes with it. So you're literally collecting money, keeping it here, sending the waste to people in the global south. Not good. So we need to raise the tax. Our friend Julia, who's gonna close out this session, please follow her and fight with her here in France to do that. And we also need to ensure that money follows the material. So if you collect a tax, if clothing is exported as a form of waste management, which hopefully we'll get to a point where that's not considered a form of waste management, then the money needs to go with it to support people in Ghana who are doing the actual work of the circular economy to do their work better and to not be going into debt. And I think to Celine's point, I really resonated with everything that you said, because I think We need new business models, and something very important is we need to understand that in a circular economy, we can have no top or bottom of the supply chain. We need to do away with the hierarchy. We can no longer have the same contracts that we have between suppliers and retailers. And most important is we need to ensure that waste is not a free resource. And for me, the circular economy is not about materials, it's about the redistribution of wealth and power. So what I want to see is resale platforms that redistribute money back to garment workers. I want to see business models that include profit sharing. And because right now the economics for the circular economy do not work. We're contacted constantly by recycling companies that want us to gather up all the waste in Ghana and ship it to Europe for free or for 10 cents a kilo. And that's going to require slave labor. So that's not going to work. We need business models that allow for people to be paid adequately for their labor.
So Felix, you were talking earlier about these big brands working in this space that have started to make moves. There'll be many out there that are on the fence about this. What's your advice to them, those that are thinking to move into the space?
I think I will follow on the argument that there's a business opportunity behind it, because unfortunately this is what makes the needle move. And the argument that we put forward is that there's a commercial opportunity in implementing these services. Now the other argument is obviously that brands need to take ownership of the end of their production cycle. And this is where we can have an immediate impact, because we're talking about in circular economy about change that could happen in the supply chain, using new materials, new coloring systems, and so forth. But this will take a lot of time. What we can do immediately is deal with what's already in the market, and creating a virtuous cycle of consumption where garments are put back into the market is a solution.
So getting back into the markets, getting to consumers then. So Celine, how do we make this whole thing more accessible for consumers?
I think education is very important, because not everyone understands the potential of circularity. Very few people have been trained, and they are only seeing a small aspect of it. And I think that it would be great if knowledge could be shared to everyone, so that everyone understands that in this path, there can be a fashion that can be creative and that can be better for everyone. It's request to change, so it's not the pretty woman icon of just buying and buying. Might need to be changed, and we need to create a desire for a fashion that is more sustainable, and we need to have the consumer with us. So that means that we need as well to help him to navigate into the oceans of greenwashing that we've been putting him through. Everything is ethical. Everything is it's well crafted, but there is no definition. All the allegations are very tough to understand. We're having labels, and sometimes it's getting a bit of struggles to navigate through that. So I think as an industry, we've got as well a duty toward the consumer to help him to understand what is a cloth that is good for the planet and good for the people. And if you look at circularity, try to find any definition of circularity within the supply chain or within the product or at the, who made my clothes. If you want to look at the etiquette, I don't know how you say that in English, tag. The tag, then, I don't know how you explain circularity. And then I would say as well, we need to awake the citizen, because there are European laws. We are lucky in France because we've got the anti-waste law, and we're moving quite, I hope, in the good directions. But the battle is just starting. So we need to just join forces, and all of us, being sitting here, and anyone that wants to really make a change, need to join forces and not to see competitions, but to look for coalitions. And maybe one thing that is very important is that it's important to have native brands that have got that are within their core product or within their core business, but it is important to change the problems. Those we currently pollute and continue to pollute and exploit people, so we need to welcome them into the change, and because this is the way that we will make the transition. And maybe one thing that was not said, but circularity is one of the biggest accelerators of sustainability. And that sometimes it doesn't resonate into the head of the consumer, but this is really the way you mitigate your negative impact and you try to do better impact. And in terms of social impact, to come back to your point, so far within circularity, there are opportunities to be more inclusive, but it's not just with circularity that we can reduce the problem of Ghana or equity or value chains that are not sustainable for human beings.
Fantastic. Education, awareness, solutions, which is what ChangeNOW and forums like it are about. Liz, the final words, can you paint us a vision of what it's going to look like in Ghana if we succeed?
Yeah, so if we succeed, then we will be able to support the good work that's happening. We will be able to upfit the market so that it's a more dignified place to work. It's a safer place to work. Right now, the bales are carried through the market. They're head carried through the market, which is a fatal job. These bales weigh 55 kilos, and they're carried by girls that are sometimes as young as 14. And that's unacceptable. And so we need to change the structure of the market, and we need to build recycling and decomposition infrastructure to handle the waste that is inevitable from this market. But most importantly is that we need to preserve the skill sets and the upcycling culture that exists. And if we don't succeed, the path that we are on right now, unfortunately, is one where fast fashion is quickly coming to West Africa, specifically to Ghana, to set up production with poverty wages, and also to control the supply of waste and to use it to create cheap inputs for a circular economy. And that will be a situation where malls and landfills will be the twins of fashion development, and we don't want to see that happen.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think we've painted the reality of what's going on, but also outlined some of the solutions and things that people can take away from here. Thank you, Felix. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Celine. Give a big round of applause, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as these inspiring speakers make their way off the stage, all of you are here, listening, watching online because you're fighting for a future that we want, right? But sometimes, I'm sure you've all experienced this, you might wake up and feel a bit overwhelmed some days and think, am I a bit too small to be able to create the change? Really pleased to invite on stage Julia Faure, co-founder of Loom, locally produced, durable, long-lasting clothing that doesn't destroy the planet in the way.
Oh, I want to have the Eiffel Tower behind, because my mother is watching, and I must thank her first, because you may not have noticed, but I'm French, and my mother is an English teacher, so she made me repeat and repeat my speech, so this is understandable for everyone. Oh, okay, hello, Mom, thank you. Okay, so as Dean said, my name is Julia Faure, and I'm the co-founder of a fashion brand that we could call ethical. And sometimes, my job gets me down. Have you ever thought of making a drastic move to reduce your carbon footprint? Like, not flying anymore? And then the next minute, you see Instagram stories of your best friend who went to Mexico on vacation, and obviously not on a sailboat? trying hard when others don't is super frustrating. And that would be okay if it was not about our planet becoming less and less livable. I have to admit that I often find my job depressing, because it seems to me that the efforts to make my brand less polluting are vain, as long as all the other fashion brands do not commit to the same path. Maybe you think I'm being too pessimistic. There is so much good news about fashion right now. It's getting circular, no? Apparently, everything seems under control. We see more and more ethical brands flourishing. The major clothing brands almost all make commitments that go in the right direction. And in 2019, we even had the Fashion Pact, a series of green commitments signed by the biggest brand on the planet: Nike, Adidas, H&M, Zara, just to name a few. If we had to sum up the commitment of these brands, what they all do is eco-designing, basically consisting of using more eco-responsible materials in the garment they produce. Organic cotton, cleanly washed jeans, recycled plastic, vegan leather, tencel. However, despite this general engagement, greenhouse gas emissions produced by the fashion industry continue to increase globally. Why? Well, the reason is by focusing on eco-design only, on circularity only, that is to say, on improving the ecological impact of each single product, we forget something crucial. Producing is polluting. Producing an organic cotton t-shirt is polluting as well. Producing a recycled polyester jacket also creates pollution. Producing a garment, no matter how eco-friendly, always releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And the main issue is that each year we produce more clothing than the previous one. In France alone, the volumes of garments sold have almost doubled in 30 years. So in short, eco-design is great, circularity is great, it is necessary to make garments that pollute a bit less, but the most urgent step is to produce less clothing, period. To respect the Paris Agreement, which, let us reminder, aims to maintain a world where global warming does not exceed 2 degrees, the fashion sector would have to divide its greenhouse gases by 3 by 2050. This means producing at least 2 times less clothing. And it's funny, because half as much clothing is the level of consumption we were in France 30 years ago. So what happened over these past years for the consumption of garments to explode that much? Do you know what happened? Well, fast fashion happened. And fast fashion has 2 ways of making us buy too much. First, cheap price. We buy too many garments, firstly because we can afford them. Don't you find it weird that some t-shirts are cheaper than a drink at the bar, especially in this area? In 20 years, the prices of clothing have fallen, more especially because we have permitted our textile industry to be delocated to countries that are not protective of the worker and the environment. Of course, production costs there are lower there than in France, of course. We buy twice as many clothes as we did 30 years ago because we can, but being able to afford it is not enough to double the consumption. Imagine a world where all the t-shirts would cost €1, but would be sold in only one color, black. We would buy Faure and then we would stop. Let's be honest, we buy far too many clothes because we can, but also because we want to. And fast fashion has become super good in the techniques of creating desire, by constantly renewing its collection, by making drops, limited edition, designer collabs. They offer so much novelty and choice that it's almost impossible today to go on ASOS website without being glued to the screen and ready to click for the latest crop top. No, maybe not the latest crop top in this room, but you know what I mean. Am I right? In short, if fashion brands really want to do their part in the fight against global warming, eco-design, circularity is a more general solution. What must be done above all is to reduce the overall production of clothing by playing on 2 levers. First, relocate our production to avoid low prices, and then stop encouraging consumption. So my question is, why don't fashion brands take care of the elephant in the room? Why do they only focus on eco-design? Why do they only focus on circularity? They know the solution is to reduce the volume. Why not just do it? Nike. Well, because this would be like shooting themselves in the foot without solving the problem. For most companies, relocating or stopping encouraging consumption means letting other brands, less scrupulous, take their place. For us, fashion brands, there is a stunning injustice. When we relocate our production, in Europe, for example, our garments become much more expensive than those made on the other side of the world. When we slow down the pace of our collection, other brands renew their even more quickly, thus taking market shares from us. No doubt. The worse you produce, the more you sell. And this is so unfair. There is a benefit for crime, meaning that our system economically favors the worst practices for the environment and for people as well. No wonder then that Shein, an ultra-fast fashion brand created 10 years ago, already makes $10 billion a year. On the other hand, Patagonia, the largest ethical brand in the world, only reached $1 billion after 48 years of existence. Once we understand this benefit for crime, scheme, we realize that relying on the goodwill of company or the power of the consumer is just a dream. If we want to fight the climate crisis, we need regulation which compel every company to do better, and my friend, to fly less to Mexico. Does it seem impossible to change the law so that we divide our clothing production by half? Yet, there are many sectors where quotas have been set, such as fishing. Does it seem impossible to limit the social and ecological impact of clothing imported from Asia? But until 2005, there were multi-fiber agreements which used to set export quota by country and by product, thus protecting the French textile industry from the unfair competition coming from low-wage, socially dumping countries. Does it seem impossible to put taxes on imported product again? Yet, in the French bike business, it has been done since the 90s. Does it seem impossible to change the laws because of Europe, because of the WTO, because of the administrative complexity, or because China will never accept it? Let's not forget that market rules are only convention that can be adapted, while climate emergency is real and our survival on this planet at stake. Legal constraints must follow and adapt to environmental constraints. In my company, I have the feeling that we have done our best to bring change to the fashion industry. We wanted to show that this is possible by trying to be exemplary in our practices. We have raised or educate consumer. We have raised consumer awareness, you know, the education we always talked about, by publishing research articles, shedding light on the underside of fashion. Last but not least, we have been trying to change the big company from the inside, delivering workshops, sharing our knowledge and best practices with them. Today my team and I have understood that doing well certainly makes a difference, but not so much as we expected, and not so quickly as needed. Above all, number one priority is preventing companies from doing harm. First, do no harm. This is why we need laws. Laws to compel everyone, including us, to do better. And we, companies, must use our power, our influence, so that these laws are voted and enforced. At the beginning, while writing this text, because it is written, all I'm saying, at the beginning, while writing this text, I was planning on repeating again and again that companies has to get into politics. And then I remember the number of people the oil industry sent to COP26. Do you remember? There were like 100 people. Business has always been political. Lobbying is not new. Companies have always whispered in the ear of politicians and have always been able to influence laws. Given the seriousness of the climate crisis, companies must stop being political for their own financial benefit only. They must become activists and use their power to support regulation curbing the climate crisis. Regulation that will serve the common good and not only their own economic interest. And the good news, because there is good news, the good news is, in France, activist companies already exist. We gathered in a movement called En mode climat. And if you're not French, you're not getting this great play on the word we spend hours to find. But it's a great answer. So please learn French, then rewatch this speech in replay, and you will laugh with other French people. So, in En mode climat, we currently count over 450 fashion companies fighting for fairer regulation, such as penalizing fast fashion practices. And since I've been part of this movement, I no longer feel powerless. Since I joined this movement, I am a little less upset by Instagram stories of people traveling around the world by plane. Since I have been part of this movement, I have understood that the fight against global warming cannot be left to the goodwill of individuals or companies, that we need regulation to make us do well. So let me call on to you. If you understand the stakes of the climate crisis, it is most likely that you are on the brink of depression. But there is hope. If you make your company an activist. If you're a business leader, use the political influence of your company for regulations moving toward more sobriety. If your company is too small to be heard by the authorities, join forces with others who share your fight. If you are an employee, challenge your leaders to engage your company into action. And if you are not important enough to be heard, get together with other colleagues who share your fight. If we remain isolated, our efforts are in vain and penalize us. But if fair rules apply to everyone, we give ourselves a chance to preserve our environment and that of the future generations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Dean.
What more can I say? How can I add any more to that? If you didn't walk into this room ready to fight, ready to make the change, ready to have a relationship with your clothes, ready to embrace your humanity and change this world, then I think you're leaving with some solutions and a bit more passion to get going. So thank you so much for joining us today. Another huge round of applause to our speakers, Celine, Felix, Julia, Liz, Maeve. Thank you very much. Now go and fight. Thank you.